The message from beyond. The year was 2251, and Earth had become something no one in history could have imagined. Cities stretched toward the clouds with buildings made of smart glass that changed color with the seasons. Ships traveled between planets like buses once traveled between cities. Children learned about distant star systems the way their grandparents had learned about distant countries. Humanity had spread across 12 colony worlds and was planning to reach 20 more within the decade. Commander Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the orbital station Unity Prime and watched Earth spin slowly below her. She was a woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen more combat than most soldiers twice her age. She had fought in the Mars Rebellion and the Titan riots. She had kept peace between colonies that wanted to tear each other apart. But right now, in this moment of quiet, she allowed herself to feel something close to hope. The communications alert shattered that peace. The sound was sharp and insistent, the kind of alarm that meant something important was happening. Vasquez turned from the window and moved quickly to the command center. Her crew was already at their stations, faces tight with concentration. Lieutenant James Park, a young officer with quick hands and quicker mind, looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was fear. Park told her they were receiving a transmission. It was coming from outside known space, from a region where no human ship had ever traveled. The signal was powerful, cutting through every frequency they monitored. Whoever was sending it wanted to be heard. Vasquez ordered the message to be displayed on the main screen. The hologram flickered once, twice, and then stabilized into an image that made everyone in the room go silent. The being that appeared before them was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water. Its head was smooth and oval, with 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern. When it spoke, the words came out in a language that sounded like wind through metal pipes. The station's computer translated the sounds into English, but the meaning was clear enough in any language. The creature identified itself as Speaker the Los of the Sovereignty. It claimed to represent an alliance of 47 species that had existed for longer than human civilization. These species had watched humanity's expansion with growing concern. They had debated what to do about the young race that was spreading through the stars like fire through dry grass. Now they had reached a decision. Humanity would stop its expansion immediately. All colonies beyond the 5th planet from Earth's sun would be abandoned. All military vessels would be decommissioned. Humanity would remain in its home system under the watchful eyes of the sovereignty until it proved itself worthy of joining the galactic community. The speaker paused, and its 3 eyes seemed to focus directly on Vasquez. If humanity refused these terms, the consequences would be severe. The sovereignty had methods of dealing with aggressive species. Those methods had been tested and proven effective over thousands of years. Humanity had 100 of their rotations around their sun to comply. After that, the sovereignty would take action. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving behind only static and silence. Vasquez stood frozen for a moment, processing what she had just witnessed. Around her, the crew was starting to react. Some were angry, their faces red with rage at the arrogance of the alien message. Others looked frightened, understanding the implications of what had just been said. A few simply looked confused, as if their minds had not yet caught up with reality. Vasquez took a deep breath and gave orders. The message was to be forwarded immediately to Earth Central Command with maximum priority. Every ship in the fleet needed to be alerted. Every colony governor needed to be informed. Within hours, every human being in the solar system would know that they were not alone in the universe, and that their new neighbors were not friendly. Director Marcus Chen received the transmission in his office at Earth Central Command in Geneva. He was a stocky man with gray hair and a face lined by decades of making difficult decisions. He had overseen Earth's expansion into space for the past 15 years. He had planned the colony missions and negotiated the treaties between worlds. He had believed that humanity's greatest challenge was managing its own growth. He had been wrong. Chen watched the alien deliver its ultimatum 3 times in a row. Each time he hoped he had misunderstood something. Each time he realized the message was exactly what it appeared to be. A threat. A demand for submission. An end to everything humanity had worked toward for the past century. He called an emergency meeting of the Planetary Council. Representatives from Earth and all 12 colonies gathered via hologram in the chamber beneath the Alps. The room was designed to hold 500 people, but right now it felt much smaller. Dr. Sarah Williams spoke first. She was a xenobiologist from the Mars colony, a woman who had spent her life studying the possibility of alien life. Now that possibility had become reality, and she was terrified. She explained that the translation of the alien message was accurate. There was no room for misunderstanding. The sovereignty was demanding total compliance, and they were not interested in negotiation. She pointed out that any civilization capable of monitoring humanity from such distances must possess technology far beyond anything Earth could match. Resistance might be suicide. General Robert Kimura disagreed. He was a career military officer with a chest full of medals and a reputation for aggressive tactics. He stood before the council and argued that submission was not an option. If humanity backed down now, they would be accepting permanent inferiority. The sovereignty would control every aspect of human life. Future generations would live as servants to alien masters. He would rather die fighting than live on his knees. The debate that followed was fierce and bitter. The colonial representatives were divided. Some argued for compliance, saying that survival was more important than pride. Others demanded resistance, claiming that freedom was worth any price. Representatives from Earth worried about the billions of people who could not simply evacuate if war came. Colony governors worried about their isolated settlements that could be wiped out with a single strike. Old tensions between Earth and the outer colonies surfaced. Accusations were thrown. Voices were raised. For several hours it seemed like humanity might fracture before the aliens even arrived. Then Maya Okafor stood to speak. She was the governor of the Titan colony, a woman in her 60s with white hair and a quiet voice that somehow commanded attention. She had been a teacher before becoming a politician, and she still had the gift of making complex things simple. She reminded the council of why humans had gone to space in the first place. It was not for resources or territory. It was because humans had always looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. It was because humans refused to accept limits placed on them by others. She asked a simple question. If they gave up now, what would they be saving? A humanity that lived in a cage was not really humanity at all. The vote was called. Representatives from all 12 colonies and Earth cast their decisions. The result was not unanimous, but it was clear. Humanity would reject the sovereignty's demands. Humanity would continue to expand and explore. And if the sovereignty wanted to stop them, humanity would fight. The response was crafted carefully. It was translated into every language humanity knew and broadcast on every frequency that reached beyond the solar system. The message was simple and direct. Earth acknowledged receipt of the sovereignty's communication. Earth rejected the terms presented. Earth considered any attempt to enforce these terms as an act of war. Speaker Delos received the human response aboard the vessel Eternal Truth, flagship of the sovereignty's enforcement fleet. He read the message once and felt something he had not experienced in a very long time. Surprise. In 3,000 years of service to the sovereignty, Delos had delivered ultimatums to 47 different species. Every single one had eventually submitted. Some took longer than others. Some required demonstrations of force. But all of them, eventually, understood that resistance was pointless. These humans were different. They had responded to overwhelming power with defiance. They had chosen war over peace. Delos shared the message with the fleet commander, a being named Korvax who belonged to a species of warriors that had served the sovereignty for 10,000 years. Korvax was massive, nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and skin like gray stone. He had fought in more battles than Delos could count. When he saw the human response, he made a sound that his species used to express contempt. He said that the humans were fools who did not understand what they were facing. The sovereignty had destroyed civilizations more advanced than Earth. They had ended wars that had lasted centuries with a single demonstration of force. These humans would learn the cost of defiance. They would learn it very soon. But Delos was not entirely certain. He had studied the humans during the monitoring period. He had watched their history unfold through databases and transmissions. These were a strange species, one that seemed to thrive on conflict and challenge. They had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times but always pulled back at the last moment. They fought each other constantly but united when faced with outside threats. They were unpredictable in ways that made Delos uncomfortable. Still, unpredictability was not the same as capability. The sovereignty had weapons that could crack planets. They had ships that could cross galaxies. They had existed for longer than human language. No amount of determination could overcome such an advantage. The fleet began preparations for the journey to the Sol system. 1,000 vessels from 12 different species, each one carrying enough firepower to level cities. It would take them 90 standard cycles to reach human space. That would give the humans time to prepare, time to truly understand what was coming for them. Perhaps some would reconsider. Perhaps reason would prevail where threats had failed. Delos hoped so, but he did not truly believe it. Back on Earth, the world was changing faster than anyone thought possible. Director Chen established what he called the Unity Initiative, a program designed to coordinate every resource humanity possessed. Factories that had built civilian ships retooled to produce weapons. Scientists who had studied peaceful applications of technology turned their minds toward war. The old divisions that had defined human politics for centuries began to dissolve. It was not that people suddenly agreed on everything. Arguments still happened. Debates still raged. But everyone understood that survival came first. Everything else could be sorted out later, assuming there was a later. Commander Vasquez was placed in charge of fleet operations. It was a position that terrified her because she understood exactly how outmatched humanity was. She had reviewed every piece of data they had on the sovereignty, and the picture was grim. Human ships were smaller and slower. Human weapons were weaker. Human shields could barely stop their own missiles, let alone whatever the aliens would throw at them. By every conventional measure, this was a fight humanity could not win. But Vasquez had not survived this long by following conventional wisdom. She gathered her best tactical officers and posed a question. If they could not win a direct fight, how could they win an indirect one? The discussion that followed would change everything. The gathering storm. 3 months after the sovereignty's ultimatum, Earth looked like a world preparing for the end times. Orbital shipyards that had once built passenger liners now assembled warships day and night. The sky above major cities glowed with the light of construction platforms. Conveyor systems stretched between Earth and Luna, carrying raw materials in a constant stream. Children grew up watching the lights in the sky and knowing that each one represented another weapon built to defend their future. Captain David Zhang commanded the destroyer Defiant, one of 50 new ships rolled out in the first wave of military production. He was a quiet man with thoughtful eyes and steady hands. Before the crisis, he had been a merchant captain ferrying supplies between colonies. Now he found himself responsible for a warship and a crew of 300, most of whom had never seen combat. He walked through his ship during the third watch when most of the crew was sleeping and felt the weight of what was coming. The Defiant was not an impressive vessel by sovereignty standards. It was barely 200 meters long with armor that could be penetrated by most energy weapons. Its main gun could punch through a building but probably could not scratch the hull of an alien capital ship. Zhang knew these limitations. His crew knew them too. But they also knew something the sovereignty did not. They knew they were not alone. Humanity was building not just ships but strategies. Not just weapons but tactics. And those tactics were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Dr. Lisa Park worked in a laboratory buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of Mars. She was a physicist who specialized in electromagnetic theory, and she had been recruited into a project so classified that most government officials did not know it existed. The project was called Blackout, and its goal was simple in concept but nearly impossible in execution. They wanted to build a weapon that could disable sovereignty ships without destroying them. Park had spent 3 months studying every scrap of data humanity had on alien technology. The information was limited but suggestive. Sovereignty ships used energy shields similar to human designs but far more powerful. Those shields required enormous amounts of power, which meant they needed efficient distribution systems. And any distribution system could potentially be disrupted. Park's team developed what they called a cascade pulse. It was an electromagnetic wave tuned to specific frequencies that theory suggested would cause feedback in sovereignty power systems. If it worked, enemy ships would lose shields, weapons, and propulsion all at once. They would be floating targets. If it did not work, humanity would have wasted 3 months and resources they could not afford to spare. Park ran the simulations hundreds of times. Each time the results were the same. In theory, it would work. But theory was not reality, and there would be no chance to test the weapon before battle. Commander Vasquez established a network of hidden bases throughout the asteroid belt and the outer solar system. The bases were small, just enough room for a handful of ships and their crews. They were powered down to minimal levels, making them almost impossible to detect unless someone was looking directly at them. Each base was stocked with supplies for extended operations. More importantly, each base was positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across major approach routes to Earth. It was a strategy borrowed from ancient human warfare. When facing a larger force, do not meet them head-on. Make them come to you. Make them fight in terrain that favors the defender. Force them to split their attention across multiple threats. The sovereignty fleet would expect human forces to cluster around Earth and the major colonies. They would plan their approach accordingly. They would not expect to find enemy ships scattered across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Lieutenant Sofia Martinez was 24 years old and had never expected to see combat. She had joined the Space Navy to explore, to see the wonders of the solar system up close. Instead, she found herself stationed on Hidden Base 7, a small platform tucked inside a hollowed-out asteroid near Jupiter's orbit. Her crew consisted of 12 people operating 4 attack drones and a single missile battery. It did not sound like much. But Martinez had been briefed on the larger strategy, and she understood her role. When the enemy fleet passed through this region, her base and 30 others like it would strike simultaneously. They would not destroy the fleet. But they would hurt it. They would make it bleed. And most importantly, they would make it angry. General Kimura oversaw the defense of Earth itself. It was a task that kept him awake for days at a time despite the stimulants his medical staff prescribed. Earth was the prize, the target that the sovereignty wanted most. If Earth fell, the colonies would eventually fall too. Everything depended on holding the home world. Kimura established 3 defensive layers around the planet. The first layer consisted of automated weapons platforms in high orbit, thousands of them, each one equipped with missiles and railguns. They would engage the enemy fleet at maximum range, forcing them to expend ammunition and energy before they reached the planet. The second layer was the main fleet, centered around the carrier Enterprise and its sister ships. These vessels would maneuver and strike, using speed and coordination to compensate for their inferior firepower. The third layer was a network of ground-based weapons that could fire into orbit. Kinetic bombardment platforms, laser arrays, missile silos. If the sovereignty wanted Earth, they would have to fight for every meter. The civilian population was evacuated from major cities. Billions of people moved to shelters built deep underground. The shelters were stocked with food and water for months. Medical facilities were prepared for mass casualties. Engineers reinforced power grids and communication networks. Everyone had a job. Everyone had a role. Even children helped where they could, carrying supplies or running messages. The mood was grim but determined. People were afraid, but they were not panicking. They had faith in their military. They had faith in each other. And they had faith that humanity had not come this far just to give up now. Dr. Williams spent her days analyzing alien psychology, trying to understand how the sovereignty thought and how humanity might exploit that understanding. She had access to the recording of Speaker Delos and had watched it hundreds of times, studying every word and gesture. She concluded that the sovereignty was fundamentally conservative. They had existed for so long that they believed their way of doing things was the only way. They had crushed every rebellion for thousands of years using the same methods. Their tactics had not evolved because they had never needed to evolve. This was both their strength and their weakness. Williams wrote a report that was distributed to every ship commander in the fleet. The key to fighting the sovereignty was unpredictability. Do not do what they expect. Change tactics constantly. Make them adapt to you instead of the other way around. The sovereignty had numbers and technology. Humanity had flexibility and innovation. In a long war, those advantages might balance out. But this would not be a long war. Humanity would get one chance, maybe two, to prove they could not be easily conquered. After that, the sovereignty would adapt, and the fight would become much harder. As the deadline approached, Speaker Delos stood on the bridge of eternal truth and watched his fleet prepare for departure. 1,000 ships filled his tactical display, arranged in formations that had proven effective across 1,000 campaigns. He felt no excitement at the prospect of battle. He had seen too much war to find glory in it. But he felt a sense of duty. The sovereignty had maintained order in this region of space for millennia. That order would not be disrupted by a species that had barely learned to travel between stars. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light travel, and the stars blurred around them. The journey would take 90 days. Delos used that time to review everything known about humanity. Their history was violent and chaotic. They had fought each other in wars that killed millions. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world and had come close to using them several times. But they had also created art and music and literature of remarkable beauty. They had explored their world and their solar system with determination that bordered on obsession. They were contradictions, capable of terrible cruelty and extraordinary kindness often within the same generation. Delos found himself feeling something unexpected. Regret. These humans had potential. In another 1,000 years, they might have become a valuable addition to the sovereignty. But they had refused to wait. They had refused to submit. And now they would pay the price for their impatience. Fleet Commander Korvax had no such regrets. He reviewed the battle plans with satisfaction. The human homeworld would be their primary target. Once Earth fell, the colonies would surrender or be destroyed one by one. The attack would be overwhelming and swift. The humans would have no time to mount an effective defense. It would be over within hours, perhaps days at most. Korvax had fought in dozens of campaigns. He knew how these things ended. The Sovereignty fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. Sensors immediately detected human ships moving to intercept. Korvax counted them and felt contempt. 300 vessels against 1,000. The humans were brave, but bravery was not enough. He gave orders to advance in standard formation. Heavy cruisers in the center, destroyers on the flanks, support vessels in the rear. It was the formation that had won 100 victories. It would win this one too. But as the fleet moved deeper into the system, Korvax began to notice something strange. The human ships were not forming defensive lines. They were spreading out, moving in seemingly random directions. Some were heading toward the asteroid belt. Others were accelerating toward the outer planets. It made no tactical sense. Korvax increased speed, wanting to bring the humans to battle before they could escape. That was when the asteroid started shooting. Hidden bases that had remained dormant suddenly powered up and opened fire. Missiles streaked through space from dozens of different directions. Drone swarms appeared from nowhere, small and fast and difficult to target. The Sovereignty fleet found itself under attack from enemies it had not known existed. Shields flared as impacts struck home. Several smaller ships were destroyed outright, caught off guard by the sudden assault. Korvax ordered his fleet to return fire, but the targets were difficult to lock onto. The bases were hidden among millions of rocks. The drones moved in coordinated patterns that confused targeting systems. Commander Vasquez watched the battle unfold from her command post on Unity Prime. Her tactical display showed the Sovereignty fleet taking damage from the hidden bases. It was not enough to stop them, but it was enough to slow them down. More importantly, it was enough to make them cautious. The enemy was learning that this battle would not be easy. She gave the order for Phase 2 to begin. The human ships that had been retreating suddenly reversed course. They came at the Sovereignty fleet from multiple angles, moving at maximum speed. They did not try to engage in prolonged combat. Instead, they struck fast and hard, focusing on isolated enemy vessels, then disengaged before reinforcements could arrive. Captain Zhang brought Defiant in close to a Sovereignty destroyer, close enough to see details on its hull. His gunner fired at point-blank range, targeting the joint where the ship's engine connected to its main body. The shot penetrated, and secondary explosions rippled along the enemy vessel. Zhang ordered immediate retreat as the destroyer began to list. His crew cheered, but Zhang remained focused. They had damaged one ship out of 1,000. The battle was far from over. The Sovereignty fleet regrouped and continued its advance. Despite the losses, they still had overwhelming numerical superiority. But now they were moving more carefully, scanning for hidden threats, maintaining tighter formations. They were adapting. And that meant humanity's tactics would need to adapt too. Speaker Thalos watched the battle with growing concern. The humans were fighting unlike any species he had encountered. They refused to meet the fleet in open battle. Instead, they struck from the shadows and vanished before retaliation. It was effective but also confusing. What were they trying to accomplish? They could not win this way. They could only delay the inevitable. Unless delay was the goal. Thalos ran through the possibilities. Perhaps the humans were buying time for some larger strategy. Perhaps they had weapons they had not yet revealed. Or perhaps they were simply making the Sovereignty pay as high a price as possible for victory. Any of these options suggested that the humans had planned more carefully than the Sovereignty had anticipated. Thalos sent a message to Fleet Commander Korvax recommending increased caution. But Korvax was not interested in caution. He was interested in victory. And victory was finally within reach. The Sovereignty fleet crossed the orbit of Mars and began its final approach to Earth. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.